Thank you so much, Ellen, for having us today and for telling us a little bit about your life. I was watching a little bit online of some of the other interviews you've done, and it's definitely super inspiring. And I'm really excited to hear all about it today.
Thank you. Thanks for coming all the way up.
So, to start off with, tell us a little bit about your journey to veganism.
Well, it started when I was 5 years old. My aunt died of breast cancer in our home, and it was really traumatic. And my cousin, who was just a year older than me, was left without a mom for most of her life. And then my mom, both sisters, went on to get breast cancer, and we became part of the breast cancer gene studies. So the genetic testing that's out there now, I often joke, my genes went to the Supreme Court because Myriad Genetics, actually the company that did the testing, tried to patent the breast cancer genes. So the Supreme Court turned that down. And it's just been a long struggle to figure out how do I avoid the diseases of affluence that hit everybody else in my family except me. They all had heart disease and diabetes. Those were the two, of course, that go together. And it was just so sad. Entire generations are losing each other, I thought, and don't even know it. As the youngest in my family, I had a lifetime to see what I didn't want to do and what things did work. And I began experimenting with diet when I almost died of colon blockage at the age of 28. I collapsed in the TV newsroom. They had to rush me to the hospital, and the emergency room doctor said they'd never seen anybody my age with such a blockage that was that large, and I would have to be on medicine the rest of my life. And it was the same year my sister got breast cancer for the second time. So I ran to the health food store, read all 5 books on fiber because that's all there was at the time, and decided to turn things around at that point. My journey was, like a lot of people my age, went first macrobiotic, which was widely touted to be a cancer preventative diet, then vegetarian, and then vegan.
So, you're reading some books on fiber, you said, and how did you research into fiber and then go to macrobiotic?
I read the works of Dennis Burkitt, who is mentioned by some of the early vegan doctors as being an influence for them, like Dr. Neil Barnard and John McDougall. And Burkitt had gone to Africa and studied native cultures there where they had no diseases of affluence, and instead of having, I assume we can be very frank in our language here, instead of having a bowel movement once every 2 or 3 days, if you're lucky here in the US, they had them after every meal. And that was just the most astounding thing to me, because I had had chronic constipation all my life. I had all these stomach aches that nobody could say what the problem was. And so once I started it, and a lot of us again started doing it this way, adding bran fiber to our foods instead of just eating the whole grains initially, then it was such a difference. And that's what Dennis Burkitt had written about, was the bran fiber specifically. So I just started reading as much as I could, and started reading the early works of Dr. Neil Barnard, who was talking about a vegan diet being preventative for so many of these diseases. So that's really how I got into that track. Specifically macrobiotics, there was a great book called Recalled by Life that was written by Dr. Anthony Sadalero. He cured his father of bone cancer and himself. He was diagnosed with it by eating a macrobiotic diet. And macrobiotic diet, at least in those times, was pretty much vegan with one exception, and it incorporated white fish. That was really the only difference. So with everything that's happened to fish, both overfishing and the amount of plastic that all fish species now are consuming, there certainly is a very compelling reason not to include that as part of your diet if you're trying to avoid cancer and everything else.
So, when was kind of like the day that you decided just to like go full on vegan? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, interestingly, again, pretty typical of my age group. I went vegan before I was married the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I couldn't give you an exact date, but I befriended a woman who worked at a small health food store in St. Louis where I was a TV reporter, and we started running together. And she had me over for dinner, and she and her wife, she didn't call her that at the time, but that's who it was, just made these amazing vegan dishes. And we didn't call it vegan back then. It was just extreme vegetarian or whatever negative label we were slapping on it back then. But that would have been around 1980. I've never actually been asked this question, so I'm doing the math in my head when I worked in television. Around 1983. And I actually can pinpoint it because there was a newspaper article that was done at the time I was macrobiotic. They came out to the house like you guys did and took a picture of my kitchen counter, and I had all the beans and whole grains on the counter. And in the interview and in the story that was written in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, they called them foodstuffs. And they had a quote from me, and I guess I really did say this, saying, you know, not really a health food nut, but I totally was, because I was realizing how quickly this was changing my life. So I was vegan before I got married, for, I'm guessing, a couple of years, maybe 3, and, you know, watching all these great changes. I took off a lot of weight and was running not competitively at all, because I certainly wasn't good enough back in those days, didn't have any training. But then when I got pregnant, that's when the doctors and the nurses and the dietitians of the time said to our generation, oh, your unborn child needs whey protein, you know, for the fetus to grow. I mean, they were telling us all kinds of things like that. And now we know that there are many organizations who sign on to a vegan diet, as long as it's healthy and well balanced, is perfect for all stages of life. But they certainly weren't saying it back then. And my gosh, you didn't want to give your unborn child brain damage at the get-go. So I went, after my babies were, they were still pretty young, but I would say I breastfed, because breastfeeding is supposed to be preventative, and research does show this against breast cancer. But after they were weaned, I went back to vegetarian, and it wasn't until I got divorced that I went vegan again.
What I find super inspiring is that, you know, this day and age, whenever me and Ryan, we're vegans now, it's super easy to be vegan. There's tons of restaurants and alternatives at the store, and it's never been easier to be vegan this day and age. But what was it like, you know, back then?
So,
you know,
there was a company named French Meadow Bakery, and I think they're still in business in Minnesota, and I had to order frozen bread from them because that was the only kind of bread that they had that didn't have casein or whey, the stealth dairy ingredients in bread that are often in there. They sometimes don't even tell you that. So the only way I could do it was to order from them, or I would make it from scratch. I had several bread makers that burned up. One of them actually caught fire. And so it was a big issue. The only vegan cheese was soy cheese, and it was really disgusting and tasted terrible. So I generally just didn't eat it. And that's one of the reasons I stayed vegetarian until my kids were weaned and a little bit older. I served the vegetarian burgers in the grade school. They let me do that. So that was kind of progressive
really
for the
cool.
times, yeah. And I would bring birthday cakes that were all vegan. So cakes, carrot cakes. There's a carrot cake in my book, Eat Vegan on $4 a Day, that is the actual recipe I would take for the cake for their birthdays.
So how do you eat vegan on $4 a day?
The simple answer, the simple 5-second television answer is buy in bulk, shop the perimeter of the store, and cook foods from scratch. And people go, ooh, I don't have time to cook from scratch. And I go, ooh, you don't have time for cancer, heart disease, and diabetes, because those are real time wasters.
Yeah, and very, very expensive too.
Right. So, you know, it's just, when you buy beans, especially in bulk, it's about $0.10 a serving compared to 3 or 4 times that much for the cheapest form of hamburger meat, which is disgusting.
So, tell us a little bit about this guy right here.
Gal, actually, Rusty the
Gal.
Rescue, hashtag Rusty the Rescue. So, Rusty was found New Year's Eve wandering the streets of Bradenton by the Manatee County Humane Society. And we were looking for a smaller dog, and we went to a couple of shelters, and it's so sad. All they had in this area was pit bulls, and we just weren't up to that party. I still travel a lot, so my partner watches Rusty when we're gone. But They suspect that she was just abandoned by her owner. She wasn't chipped, so she was wandering the streets. And New Year's Eve, as most uh, animal lovers know, is a pretty traumatic day for all animals because they just freak out at the fireworks. So we adopted her on January 4th. That's when we got her. And we've had her looked at by veterinarians, and we took her to a dog trainer for 3 months to try and socialize her. She still goes into pit bull mode attack, as you saw when you came in here. She was just ready to lay down her life for us. And
she seems like she's warming up now.
Need a belly rub? Yeah, I think we need a belly rub. Yeah, okay. She is really good about asking for belly rubs now. About, I don't know, how many, 5 or 6 a day? Yes. Yeah.
I think I think what's really interesting is I grew up in a household, and my parents, they both really, really love animals. And we had a dog growing up, and he was definitely one of my best friends from 5 to maybe about 19.
Wow.
And but then there's that kind of disconnect still with my parents in regards of, loving animals,
Right.
but the hypocrisy
Right.
of eating them.
Right.
And how for society to shift.
She is lying on your foot. I've never seen her do that with a stranger. That's so cool. Yes.
Because
good girl.
I pet her ears.
Yeah. I don't think there's any part of her body she doesn't like to be petted. No.
So
Sorry.
I think that, I think what would be really huge is not necessarily 100% of the world to necessarily be vegan, but if, say, around 20 to 30% of the world becomes vegan, then it's going to be so mainstream that, everyone, you're not going to have a choice. You're going to be kind of exposed to it because so many people are.
Right.
What do you think needs to happen for the world to get to that point?
It is happening exponentially. I just included some stats for a talk I'll be doing next week on the percentage. It used to be just in 2014, 1% of all Americans said they were vegan. Now it is 6% for 2017. And you can Google it yourself to find those stats, but it's really mind-blowing how fast it's happening. I think part of it is there's a fabulous woman who's with my publisher. She wrote the book Artisan Vegan Cheese, Miyoko Skinner, and she came out with her own line of cheeses based on the recipes in her book. And that has, probably more than anything, just revolutionized because people are so addicted to cheese. As you may know, the ingredient in cheese, casein, is particularly addictive, and casomorphine is what is in the cheese that is like morphine that keeps people addicted. And Mother Nature in her infinite wisdom wanted to make sure that baby cows kept coming back for more and would grow from this little baby calf into a ginormous beast. And unfortunately, a lot of people who eat cheese, that is what happens to their bodies as well. And it does this in a very short period of time, making a calf grow into a cow. And so I think, at least from a standpoint of expense, also, I think the world's going to be vegan a lot sooner, and a bigger part of it, just because we can't afford the space it takes to raise the food for animals to be slaughtered. That we can feed, what's the statistic, 17 or 18 more people on 1 acre of land compared to just one meat eater, a vegan versus a meat eater. So those kinds of statistics are out there, and with the world drought, with global warming, I often say I hope you like the recipes in my cookbook, because we're all going to be vegan whether we want to or not.
I think what I find so inspiring about your life is that you're a person of many trades. You're not only a vegan athlete, but you're also an author, and you're spreading kind of wisdom and helping people understand how they can be vegan and different issues. You speak at veg events and you educate people that way, and you're also a health coach, and you're a personal trainer. So tell us like what inspired you to go down that path in life.
The progression was from 18 years in television to 5 years at Smith Barney, and I focused on socially responsible investing, which in the legal definition of that it meant avoiding tobacco, alcohol, and firearms in an investment portfolio. And for those people who wanted it, the animal screen. For example, they didn't want to be buying Procter & Gamble in their investment portfolio because P&G tests on animals. So that's what I helped, marry people who wanted to be mission consistent and not be giving all their money that they had worked so hard for to a company that tests on animals and not even realizing it. Most people, when you ask them, can you name like the top 10 holdings in your mutual fund that you own, they can't, or they can't even name the top holding. So that's how my education began. And because I had been involved in I was actually a La Leche League leader. That's the breastfeeding information support nonprofit that helps new moms breastfeed their human babies. And what was interesting there, and this is really where things started percolating, because I took 6 years off to be a stay-at-home mom during that time, and that's when I became an accredited La Leche League leader. There they all were talking about our own species-specific milk and how it's best for our brain and our stomachs, and your kids don't get ear infections, generally speaking, if they're breastfed, and their speech is better, their jaw develops better, breastfeeding until college or whatever. And then the cookbooks they had were all full of meat and dairy recipes. And when I asked about it, it's like, don't mix causes, breastfeeding is controversial enough, which it is. In St. Louis, while I was there, a woman was arrested in her own car breastfeeding on a public parking lot at a shopping mall. So I got that. But after I left the Leche League, I started connecting all those dots and understanding how important it is that we really focus on our own species-specific milk. And that's kind of where the epiphany was for me. And as soon as I left Smith Barney, I contacted PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and I said, I had met Neil when he spoke. He's the president. I met him in St. Louis when he spoke there, and I was just so mesmerized by him. And I said, do you guys need any media training? And he said, as a matter of fact, we do. And so I trained a lot of their staff. I made a number of trips to Washington back in the early days to train their staff as if they were going to be doing television or print interviews.
That's so cool.
And so some of the people that now are out with their own books, they also came through PCRM's doors, not only just their staff, but doctors now who have their own media, almost conglomerates, based on their practice, but also trying to get the word out. And it's just fascinating to see how the seeds were planted really by Dr. Barnard. I mean, I have to give him so much credit. He also developed, on one of my trips there, I smelled my way into their kitchen. I said, what's going on here? And they said, oh, we're developing this cooking class program called the Cancer Project. And I go, wow, that's kind of what I've been doing all my life. I need to do this. So I became one of their trained cooking instructors and did that for 6 years. And at that point, we had grant money. And I was teaching 2 classes a day, sometimes 5 days a week, with 60 people in each class. So
wow.
I'd get through with a class, I'd go to the grocery store, pick up the food, and take it back to the community center where I was doing the classes. And it was probably the hardest work I've ever done, because we were working on concrete floors, leaning over low tables, and yet I would see incredible changes with people. A woman lost 120 pounds in 8 months, never counting a calorie. And she had been diagnosed with one of the more fatal forms of bone cancer and is still alive today. They gave her up for dead when she came to my class. It must have been now about 14 or 15 years ago. So I've seen those kinds of reversals and amazing changes. And that's why I do this, because I have 3 daughters, and it's their generation that's going to get stuck with this very hot planet and all the medical and health problems that we are passing on to them.
So in your classroom at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, what you would teach a class of 60, and what was that like? Like, would people each have their own like little small table, or would they just watch you cook the food and then they take notes? Or
oh no, we served it to them. And again, so much credit to PCRM and the training that they gave us. It is, I think, and they're still going. They call it Food for Life classes now. But it was just the best training, and it has really prepared me more than anything else, because I do the kinds of food demos I did with them at all the Vegfests, or a number of Vegfests that I speak at, where sometimes I'm doing a food demo and sometimes I'm just speaking with a keynote slideshow. But the way we were taught to do it, and we were taught, this wasn't something that I could have probably ever captured on my own, we would do 3 or 4 recipes from Dr. Barnard's book, which was the only book we used for the cancer project. And it was, I'm trying to remember the name of it, he's got so many books, The Cancer Survivor's Guide. And so it was divided into 8 chapters, so we had 8 classes, and we would do 3 or 4 recipes, and each of those recipes was a part of each of those single chapters. So the first chapter was getting to know your plant-based, actually we didn't use the word plant-based back in those days. It was just, we tried not to use vegan too much because it was associated with animal rights. And so it was just sort of an introductory class, and then there was replacing dairy or dairy alternatives, and then meat alternatives. That was, I think, the 4th class. What was the 2nd class? Anyway, they all had certain topics, and based on the chapters in Dr. Barnard's book, and that's how we did it. And I've got very good at learning how to stretch recipes. We were, if it was a soup, I'd add extra liquid. You would learn how to do it because we would take reservations, and not everybody would show up, or sometimes more people would show up at the door. And especially as the word got out, that we got lots of newspaper coverage.
Whenever you're working for the Physicians
Yeah.
Committee for Responsible Medicine, did you get to meet Dr. Neil Barnard?
Oh yeah.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan.
Oh yeah.
Definitely.
You and
What
about
is
a
he-
billion other people.
What is he like?
He is the nicest, humblest, hardest working person I have ever met in my life. And when I did media training there, I mean, I always got to a place an hour or 2 ahead just to make sure I didn't get lost. And I got to go to PCRM headquarters in Washington, which was really cool. And so I got there before anybody else, and he just bicycled to work, and...
Bicycled?
Yeah, and this
That's
is like
cool.
7 a.m. in the morning. I don't know if he still does that. But it was just the coolest thing. And at any time I've seen him, we've often spoken together at different Vegfests around the country, and he just always acts like he has all the time of day to answer your question. He's very focused, and just, whatever you want to learn, or however he can help you, he's just there. And of course, it's been a while since, I think that the whole plant-based movement has really taken off thanks to the China study, which was just coming out at the time. I was doing media training, so that's when I got to meet T. Colin Campbell, because he was one of the doctors who was
Very cool.
through PCRM's headquarters when I was there and doing my workshops. And it was just an exciting time to see how there were so many of us. All of us who were cooking instructors asked Neil if there was any way we could just volunteer to work at PCRM and camp out on his doorstep kind of thing, because we were all, they gave us a $200 a class stipend, which plus we got reimbursed for the food costs. But I could have made more money working at a fast food restaurant, but nobody was doing it for that. We were just doing it because we all were so dedicated, and we saw how food is medicine and how powerful it could be in reversing all these many diseases of affluence. But after the China study came out, that was really when we were encouraged to use the word plant-based versus vegan. And I think that, more than anything, has helped to grow the movement, because people just are more curious. I think it's less threatening to them to see, even at the grocery stores, they're using now plant-based foods. That's actually a title over different refrigerated sections at I think Earth Fair has that now, which is a store in our area. So it's exciting to see all these changes. It's everywhere.
So, I want to ask you a little bit of what's the lifestyle like? I know you're prepping to go speak at a Vegfest event, and speaking at Vegfest events and writing your books and and selling those through your website and working for yourself. What is that whole lifestyle like?
I gave up a while ago trying to make money at this, And I think part of it, it's just like the entertainment business is, and I get that, and I've had conversations with my publisher about different things. And he says, well, Ellen, if you were 20 or 40 years younger, something different would have happened. And yet I think there's a huge interest, especially in senior fitness, because the more I compete, the fewer people I see in my age group. At races, you can really see the 5-year increments where they give these awards, and there's just fewer, and sometimes I'm the only woman over 65. So the lifestyle is, I try to keep it real, and I have lived a part of my life as a single person, which is why I wrote the book Vegan for One, because the biggest problem living by yourself often is just mono eating. You kind of slip into these lazy habits for convenience reasons, and it's not necessarily, if we're going to be representing the vegan lifestyle, you want to try and be as healthy as you can. Not necessarily a gorgeous body, but at least try and feel good so that you can have the energy to do the kinds of things you want to. But I'd done media training, so I was used to living a life in airplanes and travel. This was really, because my background is in journalism, I'd had this idea to write my first book as a combination of my work at Smith Barney and as a consumer reporter. I was already following the Consumer Price Index, so it seemed kind of natural to me to slip into really tracking what prices are that are vegan. And I thought, what if we could write a book, this was back in 2008 when I got this idea, what if we could write a book that crunched the numbers on every single recipe to show that it's so cheap? Maybe then that would convince people. Because what I learned at Smith Barney was that companies like Anheuser-Busch didn't care about being socially responsible or environmentally compliant. But if you could show them how they could save money doing it, then all of a sudden their annual report says, we're socially responsible. So I thought if you could show people how to save money, they would be at the vegan table a lot faster. And so I never expected what would happen with that book. It just got to be really crazy popular, and still is, and because the price of beans and grains just haven't gone up. So the estimated price with each recipe, it just hasn't changed that much over the years, nor will it, I hope, as long as we can keep growing beans and grains. So I learned pretty quickly how to even ramp up the being on a plane a lot and just being on the road, and that was part of the lifestyle. And then, being able to come back to Florida and run, and when I'm not traveling, I try and enter a 5K race. I don't always place, I probably placed half the times that I've actually run in a race. It just depends how big it is and who shows up on race day. So the lifestyle is great. I am very lucky. I feel very blessed to have the opportunity that I do to travel around and meet these amazing vegans all over the country and go to these incredible vegan restaurants. And I had the opportunity to meet Jane Velez Mitchell, who was a retired reporter from CNN, and we both spoke at the New Orleans Vegfest together. And she really encouraged me to get off YouTube and do more Facebook Lives, and I did that. And I'm kind of taking a break from it now because I've just had to slow down a little bit. And, if I want to keep training, if I want to keep my body in shape enough to do the races and do the kinds of things that I think communicate the message with the kind of talents and abilities I have to make choices. And it's been a real hard thing to kind of say no sometimes, but I've been just very fortunate to especially go to all these great vegan restaurants too. It's amazing to see all those around the country. I got turned down by the big boy publishers for an entire year, as I had an agent shopping it, and she would send me the rejection emails. And basically it was because I was a first-time author, and I just hadn't had any books out yet to show my track record or what I could do marketing-wise. And that's really what a lot of the publishers care about, is how are you going to sell the book. That's the hardest part, is not writing it, it's selling it. And this was about the time Facebook was in its infancy, so 20,000 people really would see a post that I was sharing. And I created a page called Eat Vegan on $4 a Day, and I would run over to a very popular mainstream site like CBS News or NBC News and just comment on a story as Eat Vegan on $4 a Day, and there would be like this rush of people to what is eat vegan on $4 a day. So that's how the whole social media story with that was just kind of out of control and fun to do that. But of course now you're lucky if 20 people see a post. It's all about, as it's become in journalism, pay to play. And some of us just don't make enough money to do that. I live on Social Security now. That's really my source of income. And anything that I've saved up over the years, this is the time that you're living off that kind of money. And it's definitely a challenge. But I think my publisher always said to his new authors, I want you to read my favorite book. It's called Don't Quit Your Day Job. And I think there is some truth to that, just because it is a challenge to do everything. I still work by myself. I have hired someone to help me do posts on a couple of my Facebook pages, but otherwise I'm still a solo practitioner. So book number 2 was Kitchen Divided, Vegan Dishes for Semi-Vegan Households. I was married to a guy who was not vegan, and pretty much all my partners up until that point had not been vegan. And so I had just this huge cookbook collection of recipes that I had veganized. So the recipes in that book are recipes that are, hey Rusty, come here. I'm going to hold you leash. Where was I? Kitchen Divided. So I was married to a guy who was not vegan, and he ended up having a heart attack, and he was becoming, from the oxygen deprivation, delusional. And so as I started traveling, it got to be pretty tense when I would come back. And then I came back, this was after the heart attack, and I stayed with him for a month in cardiac rehab to the tune of $1 million, by the way, that Social Security paid in full. And this is one of the reasons that I do what I do, and I talk about the financial part of it, is that we can't continue to sustain those kinds of expenses in this country or anywhere. But anyway, I came back from one trip, and he said, I can't promise you that if you stay here, I'm not going to use the loaded gun in my nightstand. And I have a picture of it. I use that in some of my slideshows, just to talk about how when you partner up with somebody who's not vegan, you got to think about these end-of-life problems that you might run into. It's not to say that vegans don't get heart attacks or cancer or other problems, but we are generally a lot more healthier than the average population. So that was book number 2. All right. And I just wrote that to, again, make the streamline the cooking process so you don't become a short order chef if you're trying to cook for somebody who isn't vegan. Book number 3, Paleo Vegan. That was as a personal trainer and athlete. I started hearing my friends talk about going paleo, so I forced myself to read the meat-based paleo books. And I just often joke that the meat eaters made it to their publishers first. And my belief about the meat-based paleo books is that they were just Atkins repackaged and cleaned up. And National Geographic about a year later said they had a cover story called The Real Paleo Diet, and it basically quoted out of the book in about a dozen different places, saying that it wasn't like a wild boar was running through our backyard 3 times a day and we could catch it successfully without getting sick and dying. And they said we were mostly plant eaters. And no teeth, dear. Book number 4, Vegan Fitness for Mortals. Again, all this stuff, I really didn't intend to be an athlete, but thankfully, there are wonderful athletes out there about a third or a fourth my age, like Rich Roll and Brendan Brazier and Scott Jurek, who are doing these, what some people would call extreme sports or extreme events. And I'm just sort of the average Jill here doing the 5Ks. I mean, I've done 2 marathons and 12 half marathons, and I've placed in 139 as of this recording, 5K or longer races, including 1 half marathon. So I'm also 3rd in the U.S. That's what the medals are, the ribbons and medals over there are. 3rd in the U.S. currently in the. You might want to keep your hand closed like this, otherwise she'll think that you are having fingers to eat. Yes, you wouldn't do that.
Hey there.
So I'm currently third in the U.S. in the 4x100 meters, fifth in the 800 meters, and seventh in the 1500 and 400s, in my age group, to be clear. So that was Vegan Fitness for Mortals, just to show that everybody can do this, even if you hate
If you don't mind to tell the viewers, how old exactly are you?
65.
65.
Yeah.
Wow. She definitely doesn't look anything close to 65.
Thank you.
Very, very good shape.
It's all about the plants, and
I think that's definitely very inspiring to everyone out there.
Thank you. So book number 2 was Vegan Sex. We self-published because my publisher didn't think it would sell. Yeah, who would think that sex wouldn't sell? But they didn't, and the book did so well they bought the rights to it, and then a year later it came out under their publishing name. And then the last one is Vegan for One. And vegan sex, by the way, why is that a thing? Because what's good for the heart is good for other parts. And erectile dysfunction is the leading indicator of heart disease by as much as 30 years.
Very, very interesting. So, Vegan Sex is your latest book, correct?
Well, technically it was self-published before Vegan for One came out. So,
okay.
But then it was republished, or a different edition came out.
And what kind of inspired you to write the Vegan Sex?
Well, the short story is that because I was with a partner who had heart disease, we didn't have sexual relations at all. And as a result, I was having some back pain that I thought was the result of my running, and I went to a specialist who specialized in pelvic floor issues, and she said, that's not your problem. The problem is that your muscles in that part of your body have atrophied. And so they gave me some exercises to do to help strengthen that, and also physically went out and bought a dildo. And it was a really interesting physical therapy place.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, okay, this is my life, whatever. And then as things with that relationship really went south, because he became very, very hostile about my increasing success in the vegan world and traveling to speak about my books. And that's really what culminated the end of that relationship. But then she's breasty, no teeth, no bites. Thank you. I had an opportunity to have relations with somebody who was vegan. So, as I like to say, I was a vegan virgin until I was 62. And when I had my first vegan experience, it was so different than anything I'd had in my life. And I thought, the world needs to know this. And, I write about this in the book. And Dr. Joel Kahn, who is a very popular and sought-after speaker also on the lecture circuit, he is my co-author on Vegan Sex. He's a cardiologist up in Detroit, and just because he has so much free time, his family runs a fabulous vegan restaurant there called Green Space Cafe. But he's amazing, and he talks about how what's good for the heart is good for other parts. And he also talks about the medical and the scientific research part of this equation, which is I won't go into all the studies, but there's the beet study, which shows that 17 bicyclists were put on bicycles, one group eating beets before they worked out, and another group that did not, and the beet group did far better by performance, and they had a much lower rate of perceived exercise. It didn't feel like they were working out that hard. So now before every race I eat beets or drink beet juice, and my times have actually increased by a minute or two in the 5K. So that is pretty much how that has fallen out. But I think people really do need to understand. It works for women too. It's all about blood flow. So the more blood flow you have, the longer, harder you can play and be, and it's just easier to breathe. I have seen 72-year-old men come off of Viagra, and that has been an incredible experience for me to see and to understand how well this works.
I definitely think that that's a really super important issue that a lot of people are aware of, and especially that there might be different motivations that might motivate men to go vegan, but and women too. But, that kind of issue in the bedroom, I think, can be a super motivator to some people.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, again, it's not a guarantee across the board. It doesn't cure ED overnight kind of thing. But there is, now that you mentioned it, a commercial on the radio that I've been hearing locally in our area, and it's probably nationwide, but it starts out something like, "Men, why are we so sluggish and slow? Well, we have this supplement, and it's got nitric oxide in it, which is what beets have. That's the nitric oxide is what helped the athletes do better on the bicycle. So again, think about the whole foods. We're willing to pay for expensive supplements that the food kingdom gives us naturally. So I have a number of pictures on social media where I'm drinking from a can of beets or a jar of beets before my race, and I call it the breakfast of champions. Not that I'm a champion, but at least I'm still showing up at the start line. Around our last election, I saw vegans posting from sites that we now know were Russian sites that were feeding out stories that were not true. And that happens in our universe too. There are public relations firms that get paid big bucks to put out disinformation. So just understand that. So how do you combat that? Stick with the reliable sources. What are the reliable sources? News groups that have been around for a long time that don't have a CEO that has an agenda a certain way, and you can figure out what I'm talking about there, or just do the research on your own. Stick with the reliable vegan sources like Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, Dr. John McDougall. You may not want to go low fat like he does, but just stick with more reliable sources.
Nutritionfacts.org.
Yeah, exactly.
Dr. Michael Greger.
Yeah, absolutely. He's just the best out there, and he looks at all the research as it comes out, so you can feel like it's an objective look at all of this information, and just stay with registered dietitians who are vegan. That's really important. Jenny Messina, Brenda Davis, Vasanto Molina, all of them, I think those two have won the Vegetarian Hall of Fame award. And so the kinds of people who have credibility, Dr. Joel Kahn, certainly my co-author. There are many vegan doctors out there now. They've been in the movie What the Health. Again, that movie's been controversial for different reasons, but I think these are small, fine points. As our movement grows larger, there are going to be more dissenting voices. And sometimes you have to disconnect from social media and just say, okay, I got to go out and ride the bike today. And just
so
do
really
what you can.
kind of looking at some like peer-reviewed fact-based studies and seeing some of the documentaries that are available online.
Right, absolutely. Of course, Forks Over Knives, and there are just many, depending if your interest is health or animal rights, Earthlings,
Cowspiracy for the environment.
Absolutely, and dairy, if you want to look at that. And even just a 7-minute video, Dairy is Scary. I share that with a lot of people. In fact, fun story, I was on a plane, I can't even remember where it was, but I'm sitting next to this guy, oh, what do you do for a living, yada yada. He goes, I'm a butcher. I'm going like, how long am I going to wait in this conversation to tell him what I do? And of course, he's just going off about himself for a while, and then, finally the question, what do you do? Well, I'm a vegan book author going to speak at a Vegfest. And so for 2 hours, he got to hear my rant, and, he asked a lot of questions. He was from Colorado, and I was going to, I think, the Michigan Vegfest. So it was a long plane ride. So a couple of months ago, I was at our local Whole Foods, forgive me, but occasionally I do shop there, and because we just don't have a lot of great vegan options I've been to a lot of Whole Foods around the country, and they do have better options for vegans, unfortunately. I mean, I say that unfortunately. It's good for vegans, but I wish all stores, my point is I wish all stores had lots of vegan options.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I hear this guy go, hey, Ellen, and I look over to the food prep area, and he comes over, and he said, you don't remember me, I'm the guy you met on the plane. I quit my job as a butcher in Colorado and moved to Sarasota to work at Whole Foods and not be a butcher anymore. I'm going like, wow. So we took a selfie. We became friends on Facebook, but as soon as it was known he was a butcher, there was a post about something. I don't remember what it was, but he unfriended me because it got pretty intense and ugly, as sometimes, not from me, but just from some of the people who post.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the point is never underestimate what you can do as a single person. Find your passion, find a way to promote this movement in whatever way you can, and hopefully it'll make you lots of money. But if it doesn't, how much money do you really need in life, right?
All right, that's good. That's wonderful. Thank you very, very much for doing this interview with us and telling us your story. It's definitely super inspiring, and it's a good message and light to the world.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
And it was nice meeting Rusty
Rusty
too.
the Rescue. Hashtag.
Yep.